Welcome back, fancy folks. I am very excited today to do the next video in our Final Fantasy Wishes series. This is where we're going back and looking at the Final Fantasy games and kind of talking about what I'd like to see in the set coming out in June of this year. Today we have maybe definitely a top three in the series for me personally, and I think for quite a few people, especially here in the US, since it was one of our kind of first exposures to the series, and that is Final Fantasy IV. This game is just chock full of memorable characters. It has really good, kind of good epic sweeping storyline that I think connected with a lot of people when it came out. And I know people have played the Pixel remaster and things like that. It had a great DS version, all of that. So I want to dive right in on this video because we have a little bit more to get through than usual. There's just too many things that I want to touch on to kind of go quickly through it. So let's start with some of the characters. And obviously, if there is one thing I want from this game, it's what we didn't get for Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings, and that is a flip card. Cecil is just the absolute perfect candidate for a flip card. You have a white side, you have a black side, you have his paladin, you have his dark knight, and I just think it would be fantastic to kind of get that dark knight and then something really thematic, and a thematic effect to turn it into Cecil the paladin. I think everyone that's a fan of this game can kind of agree that would be a staple and something we would really, really love to see. The other character I have highlighted here, although we'll get to a few more, is Kain. Kain is just kind of one of the coolest characters I saw growing up in a video game. I always loved the whole Lancer archetype, and Kain's got a Lancer vibe, kind of unlike any other. So I'd love to see some sort of jump ability where maybe he leaves the battlefield and then comes back and directly attacks an enemy or attacks a creature, something like that. And I think we're probably going to see some sort of Dragoon represented. But as an old school player, I would love to see it be Kain Highwind and just do him justice with a card. All right, next we've got a few more characters. Obviously, I could go through the entire cast because I really do love the cast of this game. I think they're one of the better put together ensembles that we've seen in the series still, even though there's been some very good ones. But next we have Rydia. I've put the child version of Rydia on here just because it's kind of my personal preference. I just like that character quite a bit. I like the reluctant magic user coming into a story and really wanting to do good and be kind of a good influence on the rest of the world. The child naivety is really interesting in the story, and it kind of shines through in Rydia. So the other thing that Rydia brings in is actually one of the last things we'll look at, but it's the summon system, and obviously that's a huge part of Final Fantasy. I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of the iconic summons, maybe Shiva, Ifrit, Bahamut, things like that. So we will talk about some of those later. But I love that Rydia kind of brings that to the table and could be a way to introduce that. Lastly, just for the kind of main cast characters, I have Edge. I've always loved Edge. Obviously, everyone loves kind of cool ninjas, and Edge would be a great addition to that kind of tribal identity. Really interesting character in the story, and I like the backstory especially. Every ninja kind of comes in with a dark past, but I like that Edge is working through tragedy and things like that. Just makes the character a bit more interesting to add on to the mystique. All right, now for side characters. Guys, this game was maybe the hardest so far to come up with which side characters I wanted to see the most. There's so many good NPCs in this game. I've chosen two here. Dr. Lugae, of course, just kind of for the comic relief. There's not one interaction with Lugae in the game that isn't just kind of hilarious and memorable. But then you could also have Barnabas come in and be maybe a vehicle or something like that could be interesting. You've got to have the flavor text there about the oil and just all of the great dialogue from this game. But then I also have Rubicon. I think out of all the fiends that we could see, obviously there's some cool examples there. I do think a blue card or a blue version of Kainaza would be really interesting, but I love Ruby as a more nuanced villain. It wasn't the first example of that in the series, but I think it was done really well. And I love the fact that, you could have maybe not a flip card, but different versions of Ruby or something like that, that represent the, closing the cloak, showing the leg, and not showing the leg. It's really, really a memorable interaction in the game. So it'd be nice to see that represented in the set, if possible. And then, of course, we come to the baddies. And, again, I keep wanting to shy away from the main villains in these games or kind of the epic last bosses just because I know it gets repetitive, but it's really difficult when you've got a character like Golbez that just goes along so well with Cecil and really adds to the story. Again, dialogue-wise, the battle where you interact with Golbez just has some classic, kind of cringy now, but really fun dialogue and very nostalgic dialogue for me personally. So I would love to see Golbez. This could be an interesting way to bring in kind of the reflect mechanic, since that's such a big part of fighting Golbez in the game, needing to get those star veils up and just reflect his magic back at him. I think that would be a great way to maybe make that useful while he's interacting with other cards. And then, of course, we have Zeromus, just iconic, big baddie. Could be a very cool card as a villain, would go into black, maybe black and blue colors. A Dimir identity could be cool, but yeah, I love to see Zeromus at the end of the game, and I would love to see a card for Zeromus as well. All right, next we have locations, dungeons. I have the Fey March on here. I really like this idea. I haven't played all of the modern Final Fantasy, so I don't know if we went back and explored kind of a source of where the summoned are that you can actually go and interact with. I know Final Fantasy VI had obviously the Esper world, and we'll talk about that during that video because that's one of my favorites as well. But I love the Fey March. It just has a charm to it. Being able to kind of go through the dungeon part and then walk around in the City of Monsters was obviously really memorable. It was really fun. I think that we could make this work somehow in a card, and it would be a real flavor win, especially if it was maybe a dungeon where when you completed it, you unlocked location or something like that. I think that could be just a really interesting way for them to approach the different locations in these games. But again, I just love the charm. I love that you had two bosses just kind of waiting there to be challenged, and you could take them on whenever you wanted, things like that. Just really, really fun. The other one I have pictured here, and I love the concept art for this, is the Giant of Babel. This was a pretty memorable dungeon just to kind of go into a big giant, walk through the different floors, things like that. I loved this trope when it was revisited in some other games. I don't know which one predated the other, but Breath of Fire, the first Breath of Fire also had kind of a robot where you were going in and going through the different floors, trying to find controls and things like that. And I think that would be a really interesting way, again, to combine dungeons with something else. Here you could have a dungeon combined with just a massive vehicle. We're talking like a Crew 15, Crew 10, something like that type vehicle, and that would be just extremely satisfying for me to see them go back and revisit some of the old things like that and just make them big and epic within the world of Magic. So would love to see that. And the last thing I'm going to talk about are just the summons for the game. Again, this is going to be, I'm sure, more of a system that spans a bunch of games and kind of stretches throughout a bunch of games. I highlighted a few here that I believe are mostly unique to Final Fantasy IV, but even if they're not, they're just kind of fun for me. They're not the most powerful summons in the game, but I think Bahamut definitely has enough representation in the series where we'll get a version of that from kind of an amalgam of all the games, or maybe one of the more recent. But I've got Cockatrice here first. I do think this could be a sneaky, fun way to add in some of the status effects that you see in Final Fantasy, and I'm curious if they're going to try and add those in via cards, if they're going to be counters, if it's going to actually change the creature in some way. But this would be Petrification, which, maybe it turns a creature into a 07, 08, something like that, and makes it unable to attack or block or activate anything. But it would still be kind of interesting to just have it sitting on the battlefield as a stone version of itself or something like that. But the animation is also really kind of fun, especially in the original Super NES version of the game. I really like those animations. And the second one here is Sylph. Again, this might have been done in a later game, but I enjoy it here. It was one of the first summons I can remember that actually healed your party and had some modality outside of just damaging a bunch of enemies. So that could be interesting, something that regenerates your board maybe, or something like that. would be really fun to see. So this video is actually a lot quicker than I thought it would be, guys, but let me know what you think in the comments below. I know a lot of us have really good nostalgic memories of Final Fantasy IV, and there's no way that I could encapsulate everything in this video without going through and just having 50 different pictures of things. But yeah, I want to hear from you below. What's your favorite thing from Final Fantasy IV? What would you like to see if they could only pick maybe a couple of things to add as cards? What would you prefer those to be? So if you've stuck around, thank you so much as always. Feel free to leave a like. It definitely helps out the channel. Subscribing to the channel and getting updates on the content that's coming out helps even more. But I just appreciate you guys taking the time. Thanks for stopping by, and keep playing Commander.